most members don't seem to understand their requirement for them to oversee the government and the government's policies and the armed forces and the actions and decisions of senior leaders of the armed forces. They're not particularly well informed of the details of national defense. They don't need to know all the technical aspects of how an armed forces functions, but they do need to understand the relationship between budgets, missions, procurement, personnel policies, and particularly the rules of engagement of armed forces when they go overseas and so on. And Canadian members of Parliament have been particularly weak in all those areas.
Most MPs may not be interested in defense and foreign policy, but they are supposed to be the guardians of the public purse. More and more of this role has been taken from them.
The amount of discussion devoted to defense in Parliament is extremely limited, given the amount of taxpayers' dollars that are being spent.
We have a Westminster-style Parliament, and for example, when the estimates come forward, that's the military's plans for spending in the coming year. When they come forward, government members have to accept them all or reject them all. They can't pick and choose which ones they like and which ones they don't like. And if they decide to reject them, that means the government falls. It's a vote of confidence, it's a budget bill, and so the government loses. So government members tend to vote for all of the estimates as they come forward each time, whether they like them or not.
We don't have responsible government in this country. We have partyism in Parliament. We've seen the ascendance and the rise of organized party discipline, the intense role of the party whips controlling who says what and when and how.
It doesn't follow to me that there is a lack of democracy. What does follow is that people get turned off such a system simply because they recognize the futility. And in the Canadian case, there's an additional problem. And the additional problem is that all Canadians have a sense of how things run so very differently down south.
The constitutional responsibility of the Congress to look into all activities of the executive branch is very clear. And when the Congress begins to conduct vigorous oversight, things happen in the executive branch. People know that somebody's looking over their shoulder. And when they know somebody's looking over their shoulder, they behave themselves. If they know somebody is not looking over their shoulder, that's when things go amiss.
I was the comptroller for the Defense Department. I was the chief financial officer for 4 years. I had to go get the money from the Congress for 4 years. You'd have to sometimes do some things you didn't think were the highest priority, but they did. And like I say, you know, if they've got the money and we want it, you got to put up with the way they give it to you. You try to shape the way they think about it, but you have to put up with their oversight and their direction.
They fight joint, and they have to, so someone has to pull that together.
What I'm trying to determine was the extensiveness of consultations and whether or not you would...
We would spend the year getting them to approve not just the total, but also all the pieces. And that meant an enormous amount of interaction on a day-to-day basis with our oversight committees. But ultimately, they decided.
Well, the Canada assignment was an interesting one. It came immediately.
Now retired from the U.S. State Department, David Jones was the counselor for political affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa.
The more I looked at the Canadian system of government, the more I liked the American system. The American representative system means that each representative is far more directly influenced by the people and the interests and the desires and the demands of the people. The executive in the United States is a major, even a primary actor, but it is by no manner of means the only actor, nor is it the dominant actor. There is just about everything that the executive does or tries to do is subject to check, vigorous check, and defeat by Congress.
The congressional committees in Washington are all about constraining the power of the executive, because after all, that's what the genius of the United States Constitution was designed to do, to stop the kind of tyranny that is implicit in a British parliamentary system, at least as it has evolved in the years since there was a real tyranny there.
Recent prime ministers have been criticized for centralizing policymaking in the PMO, or Prime Minister's Office. But this tendency, which has its basis in the origins of our political system, has resulted in few checks on prime ministerial powers.
If there are any big decisions to be made about the commitment of Canadian forces, they're going to be made by the Prime Minister. No minister likes to mess with the food on the Prime Minister's plate. So there's a sense on the part of the Minister of National Defense that they should be deferring a bit to direction from PMO. The big stuff is going to be decided there. There is a kind of deep, it seems to me, confusion there that is endemic and institutionalized in our system.
But it is the Defense Minister, not the Prime Minister, who shows up at the Standing Committee on National Defense and Veterans Affairs to defend the government's defense budget. Art Hanger, the opposition's former defense critic, often found it difficult to get answers to his questions about the budget and the government's defense policy.
So I got a call from the minister's office late yesterday afternoon, and the minister will not be there for the first half hour. He's shaved a half hour off his time.
Well, we're going to have to prioritize then what questions we're going to put to him.
Well, I think that question one here, we talk about the fact that
the way the system works is that each party is granted a certain amount of time, between 7 and 10 minutes, usually in the first round, perhaps 5 to 7 minutes in the second and third rounds, to ask questions. And there's not really much of an opportunity for give and take, because that 5 to 10 minute period includes both the opposition questions and the minister's response.
When you've got 7 minutes to ask a minister 2 questions maybe, and the minister makes sure his answers take up a good portion of that 7 minutes, you don't have time for the follow-up, just as you don't in the House of Commons. So because, I mean, the government always gets the last word.
The spending of almost $12 billion of taxpayers' money by the Department of National Defense is quickly endorsed by a committee that has a government party majority. There is little or no oversight or accountability.
I would compare questions and answers in SCONVA to the question period in the House of Commons, where you get carefully orchestrated questions and carefully orchestrated answers, but sometimes the two have nothing in common. In other words, questions aren't being answered at all. Statements are being made in response to questions. And you see that at SCONVA quite a bit. Not to the same extent, thank God. You still have more of a chance there to get an honest answer that has something to do with your question.
So important government policies are often funded without investigation or even a vote. Parliament could, of course, impose its will on the Prime Minister by a vote of no confidence, but given the present system, this isn't likely.
If, as a member of Parliament, as a backbencher, I oppose my front bench, eventually my front bench is going to throw me out. By contrast, a member of the United States Congress can oppose the executive, and there isn't a thing the executive branch can do about it in any serious way.